A year ago, ASUS launched the ROG Ally, and at the time I said that there was a lot to like about it, and there was, but there was also some things that people really didn't like about it. So fast forward about 5 months later, well, 5 months ago, ASUS announced that they were going to be putting out an updated hardware that fixed all of the things that we didn't like about the original ROG Ally. They were going to call it the Ally X, and I've been using it as my main system for about a month at this point. And just like last year, there is a lot to like about this device, but there are some things that I personally don't like as much. So in today's video, I want to take a look at this handheld and talk about what I think ASUS got right, what they got wrong, and what I've had to do in order to make this device the best device to work for me. And of course, I'll address the RMA issues that people have had at the end as well, and talk about whether or not I can find trust for ASUS to do the right thing. This is probably going to be a long one, so get comfortable, get subscribed, and let's get started. Full transparency, ASUS sent me this for free. They don't get to tell me what's in the video, they don't get to see it before they do. They have no creative control over this video at all. But this video does have a sponsor, and that sponsor is DBRAND. You've spent lots of money on your handheld PC and you want to protect it. That's where DBRAND comes in. DBRAND makes products to help you keep your favorite tech not only looking great, but also protect its resale value in case you want to upgrade down the road. They have cases, skins, screen protectors, basically anything that you need to make sure that your gear doesn't end up scuffed up. They have so many skins available that you are absolutely guaranteed to find exactly what you're looking for. But their newest edition is based on the $1 million skin in Counter-Strike. They call it case hardened. Yes, someone paid $1 million for a skin in Counter-Strike, but you don't have to pay $1 million to have your tech look like $1 million. Each case hardened skin you buy will feature a totally unique pattern. It'll be different from all of the other ones. This includes the ultra rare blue gem patterns as well. If you buy a case hardened skin, you have a 3.2% chance to also get a blue gem skin in the package. They have skins for the Steam Deck, the Legion Go, phones, laptops, and pretty much every piece of tech under the sun. And they also have holographic skins, which are extremely reflective and look great. If you want to protect your investment or just give your favorite tech a facelift, head on over to the link in the description down below to get your own skins, cases, and more. And a huge thank you to DBRAND for supporting this channel. My first video about the Ally X was using an engineering sample, and now I have a retail unit in hand. So I want to talk about what's different between the engineering sample and the retail unit. And for the most part, it is almost 100% the same. There's a couple of things that I noticed that are a little bit different. First off, the power button, which is also the fingerprint reader, seems to be more recessed, which I like. It makes it easier to find without flipping the device up. The engineering sample was already a big improvement over the original ROG Ally, and this is even better than that. I will say that the fingerprint reader also seems far more reliable than on the original Ally, which I could never get to work for me, so I always just used my pin. The next change that I noticed was rumble. It seems off, I guess. At one point I was getting a really high-pitched whine, and the only way I was able to get rid of that was turning off rumble or vibration. It was especially prevalent in Doom Eternal. I would shoot a gun and the rumble would just remain on until I jumped, and it had this horrible squeal. After a reboot, the squeal went away. I really wish that I had captured it during the squealing, but it's gone now, and I can't replicate it. But Doom Eternal still seems to have a rumble bug, though I found a way around this, so if you stick around to the end, I will explain how I got rid of it. None of my friends that have engineering samples or retail units have had any of those same issues that I've had with rumble. I reached out to ASUS about it, and they are sending me a new one to compare with, and I'm sending this one back so that they can inspect it and figure out what went wrong. But no way it gets here before this video comes out, so I'll probably give you an update in the future, so make sure that you subscribe if you want to check that out. Let's talk about what ASUS changed with the Ally X over the ROG Ally. I want to hit each change And after a month of use, I think it was, talk about whether or not I think it was a good change or a bad change. The screen and the chipset of the ROG Ally X are exactly the same as the Ally 2023, so you can expect that they would perform exactly the same, except they aren't. In my first video, I was under embargo for benchmarks. The reason for this was the performance profiles have all changed. The pre-production units that I had before also had the same power profiles that the Ally 2023 had. Silent mode was at 10 watts performance, 10 watts, performance mode was at 15 watts, and turbo mode was at 25 and 30 watts if you were plugged into a wall. The retail unit, however, silent mode has been running at 13 watts, performance is bumped up to 17 watts, and turbo is still at 25. When we get to the benchmarks later on in the video, we'll see how this actually shakes out. The most significant change to the Ally X over the 2023 Ally has to be absolutely the massive 80 watt-hour battery. I ran Cyberpunk 2077 for an hour on the Ally and on the Ally X and on the Steam Deck OLED. I used the exact same graphical settings, the only difference being I ran the game at native resolution. On all devices, 1080p on the Ally and Ally X and 800p on the Steam Deck OLED. The 80 watt-hour battery in the Ally X is double what the 2023 Ally has. And now I think it has to be the largest battery in any handheld in the gaming PC industry. The ridiculously large Ayaneo Qun only has a 75 watt-hour battery, and the Lenovo Legion Go has a 55 watt-hour battery. The Steam Deck OLED has a 50 watt-hour battery, and when comparing the deck to the Ally 2023, the deck wins on battery life every single time. This comes down to how well the deck performs at low TDP due to the highly efficient Van Gogh chipset. ASUS is using the Z1 Extreme chip, and it just can't perform as well at low TDP numbers. But if you just brute force it with a giant battery, does it really matter? Does it? I like to think of the Van Gogh chipset as being like those Japanese woodworking videos. I don't know if you guys watch these, but where they slowly and precisely chisel down a square peg to fit into a round hole. Meanwhile, in order to get the Ally X to accomplish the same thing, the exact same task, ASUS is using the battery like a giant f***ing hammer. It isn't the elegant solution, but if it gets the job done, do we really care? In my battery test, after 42 minutes in Cyberpunk 2077, the Ally 2023 charge decreased from 89.6 down to 5.7. I would have done a longer test, but I got a low battery warning. I did the same test with the Ally X, and it decreased from 100% down to 56%, decreasing by 44% over that full hour. That is a significant improvement. The Steam Deck OLED decreased from 91% down to 48% in 1 hour, which is essentially the same thing. It's worth noting that the Ally X also can charge faster than the Ally. The Ally caps out at 60 watts, I believe, while the Ally X can charge at up to 100 watts. Though, if you want to take advantage of that, you have to buy a third-party charging brick, as the Ally X inexplicably still ships with that same 60-watt brick that the Ally does. I've included the bricks that I use to charge my stuff in the description down below that like button. I use them for pretty much everything, and the brick that comes with any of the devices that I own always just stays coiled up and thrown in a drawer because I always use the bricks linked down below the like button. I wouldn't have said that the Ally was necessarily uncomfortable, but it wasn't anywhere close to the comfort of the Steam Deck. If I were making a ergonomics scale of handhelds, a 1 on the scale would be the Nintendo Switch. I would give the ROG Ally 2023 probably a 2, the Legion Go a 3, and the ROG Ally X would be a 4, with the Steam Deck, both LCD and OLED, would be a 5. The rounded off corners on the Ally X really improve it over the previous version, but it doesn't come close to the deck because the deck has those massive rounded handholds that just feel fantastic. It makes the deck feel really, really light. Even though, yes, the Ally X is heavier than the Steam Deck feels almost lighter than air because of the ergonomics. And that's something that the ASUS they've come a long way from the first one, but they still got a long way to go to catch up to the Steam Deck. The joysticks in the Ally X are very much improved over the sticks in the Ally. They have better tension and the top feels better thanks to the scoop. for where your thumb goes. In my opinion, they also feel very smooth when you're rotating them. ASUS moved the sticks slightly, and this leads me to sometimes hit the screen with my thumb when I fully deflect the right stick towards the left side. It isn't a huge deal, but I don't like it. And I do think the sticks are more ergonomically placed, but the screen issue drives me crazy. One thing I really wish that they had shipped with is capacitive sticks like the Steam Deck. Gyro works fine on the Ally, but I don't really like using it without the touch sensitive sticks. You always have to deal with binding some button to either activate or deactivate gyro, and it's much easier, in my opinion, to just set your thumb on that right stick and have it know, okay, well, whenever he's touching, turn on gyro, and then if you got to reset, you just lift your thumb off and it lets you reset it. It's a very elegant solution that Valve came up with for the Steam Deck, and I cannot wait for everybody to copy it because it makes gyro so much better. The macro buttons on the back of the Ally were big, and sometimes I would hit them by accident. The Ally X has much smaller macro buttons. They're still easy to reach, but they're not in the way, and I like them a lot better than the buttons on the back of my dual edge Sense controller, better than the buttons on the back of my Steam controller, but I still do prefer the buttons on the back of the Steam Deck because they just feel really good. Plus, you got 4 of them. I usually only use 2 of them, but the thing is whenever I'm playing on the Steam Deck, I always use 2 of the buttons on one side, and the other side I never use, which is a really weird use case scenario that I kind of force myself into. The D-pad is a big improvement over the Ally 2023 as well. When I first saw the D-pad for the 2023, I thought that looks terrible. Getting hands-on with it, it was much better than I thought it was going to be. But the Ally X is absolutely an improvement over the 2023 model when it comes to the D-pad. However, the D-pad on the retail unit that I have squeaks when I press down. It's intermittent, it doesn't happen every time. And just like the Rumble, everybody that I've spoken to has said that they haven't had any issues with it. I didn't have any issues with the engineering sample having a squeaky D-pad. I think that this just comes down to whenever you make thousands and thousands of a thing, some of those things that you've made are going to be not great ones, and I think that I got a not great one. I'll report back after the replacement gets here. ASUS also added a second USB port to the top of the device in place of the previously proprietary eGPU port. I don't have an eGPU, so I can't test eGPU solutions, but I think it was a great move. I know that the XG Mobile has more bandwidth than the new ports do, but most people aren't going to spend the ridiculous amount of money for an XG Mobile device. So this is going to be good for a much larger group of people, though I would completely understand frustration and irritants from anyone that spent money on an XG Mobile eGPU solution, because now that thing is going to feel like a brick, like a really expensive brick. And if that's you, I certainly would not upgrade to the Ally X over the Ally. If I do pick up an eGPU for this device, I'll make a video about it in the future. Let me know in the comments if that's something that you would like to see. In my original review of the ROG Ally, I said that it seems to be pretty user serviceable. And the Ally X seems to continue this, though I don't know much about the spare part situation. I know Valve are working directly with iFixit for spare parts, and while you can find spare parts for the Ally, they always seem to be coming from some third-party website, and I haven't been able to figure out if they're officially sanctioned or not. I will say, however, that the layout on the Ally X is great interior, and it's really easy to get in there and swap out a hard drive if you want, which I did, and man, it was easy. More on that later on in the video. The speakers on the Ally were one of its bright points. Most people really liked how they sounded over the Steam Deck, and the Ally X uses the exact same speakers. I think they sound great. They get very loud, and I'm not really noticing any distortion at high volumes, although I gotta be honest, I would never use them at full volume because it's just crazy loud, and who actually wants that? This is me talking into the microphone at the same distance it is away from the ROG Ally X. Before we move on to what I don't like about the Ally X, let's take a look at how it performs, benchmarks, because we now have those higher TDP settings. For the most part, you're not going to see massive improvements over the Ally. I've been finding that while you can eke a few more frames out of turbo mode, it usually isn't enough to warrant the higher battery drain. For me, in the games that I've been playing, the 17-watt performance mode seems like the sweet spot for most of the more demanding games that I've been playing on it. Of course, this is going to change on a game-by-game basis, which is why it's great that we have easy access to these options. For less demanding games, obviously silent mode is the way to go, but performance mode is pretty great with this big battery. Take a look at a few of the benchmarks that I ran on the Ally X. I will say that you also can go into manual mode, and when you're in manual mode, you can push everything all the way up to 30 watts, whether you're on battery or not, and you can go all the way down to, I believe, as low as 7 watts, if memory serves. I don't think it's going to surprise anybody watching this that the software is my biggest gripe with the Ally X. It's Windows. This isn't ASUS's fault. They don't have access to SteamOS yet, even though Valve have said that they planned on bringing it to other handhelds. There's no way of knowing if ASUS would have taken advantage of that if they did have access to it. But Windows on a 7-inch screen is just bad. The touch targets are too small, and it constantly reminds you that you are not on a console, you are very much using a PC, which is fine, but things popping up where you have to interact with Windows before a game launches. I mean, once a game launches, it's usually fine, but some games will have really strange behaviors. One example is Sonic Mania. When you launch that, it's in a little tiny window, so you have to adjust the settings, which are hard to see on a very small screen, and the window's small on top of that. But once you set it, you're good. That's just one example of irritations that come with using Windows. None of that stuff happens on SteamOS. Of course, Windows isn't all bad, especially if you're a fan of Game Pass, which doesn't run on Steam Deck outside of cloud gaming. But the big advantage for Windows is it just has better compatibility than SteamOS, and that shouldn't be a huge surprise. In fact, I think it's crazy what Proton can allow us to play on Linux. I very much prefer playing games on SteamOS, but Windows is good enough for now. Another thing I don't like is the lack of trackpads, though the trackpads on the Legion Go is disappointing if you ask me, since it doesn't really interact with Steam input the way that I would like. I mentioned earlier I really wish this thing had capacitive sticks for gyro, but 99% of people aren't going to care about those two features. That's it though. That's pretty much everything that I don't like about it. Lack of capacitive sticks, lack of trackpads, Windows. Those are the things I don't like. And if we could get those things replaced, that might change my mind. But even though I don't really like Windows, ASUS also shipped a new version of Armory Crate with the ROG Ally X. It's got some cool new features and UI elements, and since launching the Ally last year, ASUS has done a lot to improve Armory Crate. I like that you can go into a game and have it select which controller configuration you're going to launch with, as well as adjust your VRAM and power profiles, so that once you're dialed in on the settings you want to play, Armory Crate just remembers all that stuff and applies it when you launch the game. Although I have to be honest, 99% of the times I'm playing games that are on Steam anyway, so I launch straight into big picture mode. But what I don't want to deal with is all this Windows nonsense. Well, I've got good news for you, because my friend Rich, aka Fan the Deck, has been working with the folks that make Bazite to get Bazite bugs ironed out before the launch of the ROG Ally X, and most of the bugs are actually gone. For those of you that don't know, Bazite is an alternative OS to SteamOS. It's Linux, like SteamOS is, and it uses the SteamOS UI to make your PC gaming experience much more like a console. Basically, it looks and feels exactly like SteamOS with a few small differences. I've still run into a few issues running Bazite on the Ally X, but I'm really impressed. What we have so far is pretty fantastic. Sometimes I quit a game and it hangs, so I have to use the Steam button, which is the button on the left side of the screen on the Ally X, in order to kill the game. Gyro works fine, but we don't have capacitive sticks, so it isn't something I really use all that much. Because ASUS decided to put M.2 2280 drives instead of 2230 drives, it's much easier and cheaper to find big storage for your Ally X. I ended up picking up a 4 terabyte M.2 2280 drive, link in the description. It was really easy to install, like 6 screws. Then, after I put the Ally X back together, I booted into the BIOS and I used the cloud recovery to install Windows. After that was done, I installed Bazite over the top of it. For some reason, Bazite sees my drive in gaming mode twice. It isn't a big deal, I can just ignore it, but it is a little confusing. Another thing to keep in mind is the first time that you boot a game, you're going to have to compile Vulkan shaders, which for some games can take a really long time. Of course, this obviously not recommended by ASUS, so if you do decide to install Bazite, you do so at your own risk. But I'll link a written guide down below and a link to Rich's video about this because I think it's an awesome video. But overall, Bazite on the ROG Ally X has me very excited for when SteamOS finally gets shipped. I didn't want to have to redo all my benchmarks because I'm not a benchmark guy, but I did rerun my Borderlands 3 benchmark using Bazite to see if there was a big performance difference, and it was just about the same as it was on Windows, which shouldn't really surprise anybody because we've been getting, this same kind of experience using Proton for a while. Remember that bug that I mentioned earlier in the video where when I was playing Doom, the rumble would stick on and wouldn't shut off? That only happens in Windows and does not happen when I have Bazite installed. So it leads me to think that this is a software issue and not a hardware issue. Let's wrap things up with what I like, what I don't like about the Ally X. What I like: the big battery, the better ergonomics. These things make the Ally X a big improvement over the 2023 model. The controls are all improved, including the D-pad, the sticks, the face buttons, the macro buttons. Armory Crate continues to impress. The screen is just as fantastic as the 2023 model, the audio is great, and you get the performance boost of the Z1 Extreme chip without the drawback of the terrible battery life. What I don't like Windows on a 7-inch screen. I don't like the lack of trackpads, and I don't like that we don't have capacitive thumbsticks yet. I also don't like how ASUS has handled the RMA process in the past. I don't like the lack of transparency around the SD card issues with the previous models, and I really hope that the commitments that ASUS has made when Gamers Nexus held their feet to the fire turn out to be true. I will say that I personally have never experienced the RMA issues that everyone else has, but I absolutely believe that it is an issue that ASUS 100% must address moving forward. I'm still not sure if I trust them, but the microscope is on them right now, and that's usually when you start to see real change, so I am optimistic. Finally, can I recommend the ROG Ally X? Of course, that answer is, it depends. First off, it's an $800 device, and I won't say if it's worth $800 because I think that that's up to each person individually to determine based on their financial situation. I will say that you could buy a 64 gigabyte Steam Deck as I record this for $350. So you could literally buy 2 Steam Decks for the price of an Ally X, and you would still have enough money left over to buy a 1 terabyte SSD, link in the description down below, for one of those decks. But let's imagine that you have zero interest in SteamOS. You just want to run Windows on a handheld PC, and you don't already have one. I think the Ally X is the Windows handheld to beat right now. I prefer the larger screen of the Legion Go, don't get me wrong, it's amazing. But the inclusion of the ridiculous 80 watt-hour battery in the Ally X just makes it so much more compelling. But if you already have a handheld PC, then I'd say it's probably better to just wait. Yes, the battery life and performance on this is fantastic, but unless you can pass down your current handheld to a kid or sell it to somebody, why have 2 of them? I'd say just wait until your current handheld can't hack it anymore, or a new handheld comes out with more powerful chipsets or better battery life than this. But again, that's up to each person individually to weigh those options. What I will say is that the Ally X is a really, really fantastic piece of hardware, and I think that ASUS has knocked it out of the park with this one. From the NerdNest, I'm Bill. Stay rad.